What I'm going to do is simply facilitate with some introductory remarks and raising some questions, some of them tough, but some of them relatively straightforward. My thought really is to get a very, very new kind of conversation. And now, as you know, the title of this particular symposium is Are We There Yet? I want to begin by telling you a joke that I tell almost every class that I teach at the master's level, not necessarily at the PhD level. They're spared from this joke. The joke goes something like this. A sociologist, a psychologist, and a philosopher is asked what makes a good curriculum. The sociologist says, well, it depends on the social norms of society, the ways in which kids are socialized into, etc., etc. You can kind of fill in the gaps. The psychologist says, well, it depends on the learning style of the particular individual, their readiness to embrace new learning experiences, etc., etc. The philosopher is rather more difficult and says, it depends on what you mean by curriculum. It also depends on what you mean by good. It also depends on what you mean by makes. And come to think of it, the question mark is deeply problematic. I'm going to do something very similar in relation to this particular seminar. See that there are four terms and a question mark there. Are we there yet? I'm going to actually ignore the term are and indeed spare you from the difficulty of deconstructing the question mark, but focus on the other three concepts. Are we there yet? Who are the we that we are referring to? Is it the individual that is the focus of learning, global learning, or is it the collective? And if it is a collective, then who is the collective? To what extent has the idea of GCSE, Global Citizenship Education, become focused on I rather than we, as referring to a set of competencies that each student as individual is expected to develop? How can we think of GCSE in a much more relational way, whereby a collectivist approach is adopted to learning about globe and its interconnectivity? How do we stretch the borders of we to include people who we might never meet and who are really a long way away from where our ordinary everyday relationships or even know of or may not even have heard of? How do we extend the borders and the boundaries of we? As far as there is concerned, the notion of there also invites a conversation, a critical conversation. The idea of there here suggests a teleological end, a goal that it is assumed is possible to achieve. It is an end point. Does global citizenship have an end point? Or is it a continuous process that must continue forever and ever and ever for as long as we live and as long as the earth is still in place and intact? So what are the goals? What are the goals of GCSE? And how can this realization be measured? Indeed, how can progress towards whatever goal that is being imagined as our teleological end can be approached towards? The question really is it necessary to think about global citizenship in existential ways or in teleological ways? Are we going to become a Hegelian here or a much more Freudian here? The idea of yet raises, of course, temporal questions about time. Can the goal of GCSE ever be realized in its fullest sense? Or is it a goal that needs to be rethought, its aims and its ideas need to be reinvented as we encounter new circumstances, new conditions, new sets of people, and new sets of demands? As conditions change, so do we need to change our thinking about global citizenship education, which of course suggests whether it's possible to think about global citizenship education in abstract normative terms or does it always require some kind of concrete location of some kind? What has been achieved already, and what remains to be done, and how will we know when it has or has not? Now, this appears to me to be some of the questions that you can think of. I'm sure there are many other questions about we, there, and yet. Temporal questions, questions about teleology, and the questions about the subject. Those are the three types of questions that we need to think about. This is not an easy conversation. This is a difficult conversation because we are so used to thinking about linearity of objectives, implementation, outcomes, reflections, etc., etc. This kind of conversation does not admit linearity, but it involves a very complicated set of questions that really ask us as to whether the type of typology or type of logic that we have assumed in the past about realization of higher education goals itself is not linearly framed when it cannot be linearly framed. So those are the kind of very, very difficult questions that I wanted to raise, and I have actually sent these questions to each of the participants here, and I think what we like to see is you picking up one or two, not all of them because there's such a large number, and just reflect upon some of the things that I have raised as a stimulus for our conversation. So perhaps we can go in that. Is that okay, Tracy?
Yes.
Okay,
Sure.
over to you.
Okay, thank you. So I was trying to pretend that I did not know the questions, but obviously I can't do that. Okay, a little bit of introduction. My name is Tracy Zou. I work in the Center for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning at the University of Hong Kong. And the reason I'm here, maybe probably 3 years ago, I met Tracy Fortune and your Tracy here and in another campus of La Trobe. And we talked about the way that we do things in the University of Hong Kong, and we collected the wise practice from staff members on how they do teaching and learning in various subjects, including assessment, global citizenship, and then we compile it into good case studies, disseminated it, supporting small pilot projects, very similar to this project. So right after my visit to La Trobe 3 years ago, I heard the good news from Tracy that her project is successfully funded, and now here I am. Okay, so maybe I picked the question from we, because are we there yet? Maybe I can start from we. I'm relatively from a different culture and from relatively far away compared to some of the panel members here. And in Hong Kong, global citizenship and internationalization of the curriculum are linked. And it's a very big strategic movement in Hong Kong. All public funded universities in Hong Kong are asked to internationalize our curriculum and to work on internationalization at home. And unfortunately, have been funded by the government with around 60,000 Australian dollars project across 4 institutions, 3 in Hong Kong, 1 in mainland China, on this subject. And I feel it's very interesting to note that when I look at the curriculum and our staff members, the we question, I want to focus on staff members, educators, including some of the people inside and outside university. And I just talked to Wendy during the break. In Hong Kong U, there are over 50% of staff members from the UK, from the US, from Australia, more staff members from overseas than staff members from Hong Kong, especially professors. And for subjects like Chinese cultures and Chinese society, and during the review of their curriculum in our internationalization initiative, we found out a very interesting phenomenon that the reading list or reading materials sent to students consist of the 90% literature from the UK, from the US, as Lynette pointed out, while the subject, remember the subject is Chinese society. And then there was, at the end of the reading list, there was one literature from China or written in Chinese. So internationalization of the curriculum in our context is quite different from yours, I guess, because the mission, because the things we face are different. And then very interestingly, I met scholars from the Shanghai Jiao University. They are doing something very differently too, because their curriculum are very Chinese-based, and they are looking to include some more Western or the general Western society literature into their curriculum. But we are on the same project. So the interesting thing is, I really like the way Fazal deconstruct, are we there yet? So by looking at we, it includes even the educated academics world, includes so many different people with different identities, facing different issues. The issues you face here, if you move to Hong Kong next year, starting your new academic career, the issue you face would be vastly different. And yes, this is what I want to share. Final point, I'm really amazed to see in this room, there are people from refugee talent, there are people from community, from other places. I think that you are part of the we, definitely, but we don't usually think about that. In my work, I face academics mostly, and I really want to include the community people in the we conversation. Thank you.
My name is Valerie Clifford. I met Tracy online before she started this project, so I've kind of been along thinking with her all the way through the 3 years, which has been really good. I'd like to address the there and yet, because to me they're kind of interlinked. And we've only got 5 minutes, so I'm going to stick to a script. Firstly, I personally think that there is no there. This is a journey we're on, and what we're after is an ideal, which to me is an ideal of peace, sustainability, equality and justice. And whenever I use that word ideal, I have a colleague who says to me, this is not an ideal, Val, this is about survival-based common sense. And I think this was very much what Lynette was saying in her talk this morning. So the other point is that the world isn't a static place. So we have to hold this goal in front of us, I think, for survival. And we have to recognise that we are in a constant state of flux in the world. And we have to continually adapt what we're doing to address that. So global citizenship education is not an end in itself, it's a means to an end. I think that the changing language that we've used over the years reflects our ongoing adaptation. We've talked about international education, then internationalisation of the curriculum, internationalisation at home, global citizenship education, and for people who have difficulties with that concept, we now talk about active, socially responsible citizens. And I think that this changing language, to me, is not problematic. I know that Wendy's written some stuff about it being problematic, but I actually don't think it is, because I think it shows that we are actively and critically thinking about what we're doing and changing what we're doing is going along, and I think that is healthy. Because to me, the terms itself are not important, it's the underlying values and mindset that they represent that's the important thing, and I think that has gone through all that discourse. So the goal is an ideal for me, that we must constantly strive to get there, so that strive to get there is vitally important. And it's not just for the individuals in the world who may benefit from some of our successes on the journal, but we're talking about the survival of everyone and every one of the planets. So that's how big it is, and I think Lynette really made that point in her opening speech. So the yet is interesting. Have we got there yet? I think you can look at the state of the world and despair, and again, Lynette mentioned that in this dysphoria that there seems to be around. But we're talking about a change process that's going to go on over generations, and I can remember, no, that's a story, I must have stopped, okay. And I actually think we've achieved a lot already, because the fact that people speak and write against our ideas, and I've had some colleagues who've been very vitriolic towards me about these whole ideas, shows that they're worried, okay? And that we are questioning the status quo, and that we actually have some traction with our ideas, so I like that. And I think there's a growing literature, or internationalisation of the curriculum, global citizenship education, and there is a growing literature on post-colonialism, critiquing current education and development models, which all feed into educators being more aware of what they are doing and what they are achieving through their curriculum and pedagogy. And I think we need to engage a lot more with that post-colonialism literature. And I don't think a lot of people on the ground in this area are actually engaged with it, and I think we have to move along. I think the other thing we've got to recognise is how complex and challenging this work is. We need to be aware of the influence of the dominant discourse on how we think and how we behave, and need to be able to navigate the cultural considerations that shape our own understanding of issues and shape how we respond. Again, a message that's come through everything we've heard this morning. I think the other thing is emotions. We have to be aware that we're dealing with the influence of emotions on our understandings and on our actions. We talk a lot about global citizenship education being transformative, and if it really is, then we have to realise that students are facing a long-term struggle with reconciling new knowledge with old, but also in terms of adaptation of their identity and their whole way of being in the world. And that's a huge struggle. And I don't think it's just students who are struggling with that, I think staff are as well, because we are really, for some people, just devastating their whole concept of what they've worked with in their lives. I think the other thing that's also been mentioned is collaboration. We've got to look at not only what we're doing, but how we're doing it. This isn't a solo enterprise. Individuals acting alone are not going to be able to achieve the ends. Okay, we have to work together. And working in collaboratively is something that we have to learn to do effectively and efficiently. And I know in higher education for years now there's been a real emphasis on teamwork and group projects, but then I hear employers saying, yes, they learn about all this teamwork, but everybody wants to be the team leader and thinks that they're capable of being the team leader, and they're not. So I think we really have to really critique what we're doing in that area and look at it again and how we're doing it. And the last point I want to make, last but one, is about our organisations and systems. We have to realise that the ideas associated with global citizenship education are difficult for organisations and systems to take on, as they are anti-establishment and counter-hegemonic. We need a new type of leader in all our sectors, like politics, economics, environment, so ideas can take deep root. Can we actually get senior higher education personnel to commit to outcomes for ethical reasons rather than financial ones? Okay, the whole narrative has to shift. Okay, and the more educators who join this social process, the more future leaders we will be influenced, because our students are the future leaders, and perhaps one day the world will be really a better place. And just the other thing, we need to have a discussion about evaluation of what we're doing. And some of the speakers this morning have spoken that, and we need to have a talk about that at the meta level and the micro level. I don't think we're addressing that really now.
Thanks, Carol and Tracy and Fazal. And thank you to Tracy for the question. Oh, before I start, I should introduce myself just briefly. I'm Wendy from the University of Tasmania, and I'm here because I connected with quite a lot of people at La Trobe. From the beginning of last year, I've been undertaking a National Learning and Teaching Fellowship funded by the old Office of Learning and Teaching. And that's enabled me to work with and connect people across 4 universities, students and staff, around 2 ideas that we're bringing together. One is global learning, and the other is students as partners. And through that work, Tracy, Demir, Anu, Sinead have all been part of that, as has Fazal. So that's, I guess, what's brought me here. I just want to thank you for the question. Are we there yet? I think it's a great question. I must admit, when I first read it, I thought of Shrek and the donkey in the back. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And I thought it was a very interesting way to title a symposium. And while Fazal was talking, unpacking and unpicking this question, I couldn't help thinking of the movie and wondering, now if Basil was in the back with Donkey, what kind of movie would we have had? A very different one, I think, and a very interesting one. Okay, I'm going to return to the question of we. What do we mean by we? Although I have to admit I found this very difficult to tease out because I think we can't address the we without thinking about the there and the yet. But I'll try and focus on the we. Okay, so the we, the bit of the we that I would like to focus on is students as well as staff in universities. And I recognise that this is kind of, if we think of this as a kind of whirlpool, this is the centre, this is the people that we see and interact with day by day, although we're all connected across human species and beyond, as Lynette pointed out. So students as partners, as Denise said, it's become quite a buzzword, at least in the Anglosphere. In some universities, very quickly. I think the first publications only were perhaps 4 or 5 years ago, but it has taken off. And it's very quickly evolving. I've just come from 2 days at UQ with a national roundtable around this students as partners. It's already not students as partners anymore, but student-staff partnerships, which feels a bit more comfortable to me. But it's really provoking the people that engage with this concept to reconsider, to rethink what it means to be a student, what it means to be a teacher or an administrator as well in universities. And I've taken the idea because I think it's absolutely vital that we bring it into this global citizenship space. Why? It's because I think fundamentally global citizenship really calls into question traditional understandings of what knowledge is in universities and who produces it and how it's produced. In universities, disciplinary knowledge is what we usually think of as knowledge, and it's usually something that is earned and owned by academics and passed on to students. And it's linear, so the longer you work at it, the more you own of that knowledge. And our role as academics is to pass it on and to assess students. Global citizenship or global learning is not that kind of knowledge. It's knowledge that has to be produced by everybody in particular context, in particular space and time. We all bring particular perspectives to our understanding of the increasing interconnectedness in the globe. And global citizenship, as I think of it, is the continual process of making sense of that interconnectedness and then responding to it ethically. And so it is a kind of knowledge that is constantly changing, and it has to be produced and reconsidered and questioned and pulled apart collectively from very different perspectives. And in this space, I just don't think there's a hierarchy. I think there's an equality of value. And to me, I think the students as partners has tremendously radical potential because it really disrupts. When it's working well, it really disrupts our traditional notions of knowledge. And it has implications for the there and the yet, because when we're talking about there and the yet, traditionally we're talking about making judgments, we're talking about assessment of students and evaluation of the work of the universities and so on. And both of those things have to be radically rethought. And so it is a new buzzword, but I think it's got potential for incredible richness because it pulls on much earlier roots in critical pedagogy and anthropological pedagogy. Bell Hooks, who's already been mentioned a few times, has inspired me for decades, and her work is as vibrant and as new and as useful in this new space as it ever was. Other work, radical work, by Australians like David Bood on assessment, that's really arguing for the passing over the assessment, the responsibility for assessment to students themselves, to learn to assess, to reflect on themselves and each other as essential to global learning. So there's a lot of earlier work, radical thinking that is now coming in and being revived in, I guess, a new language for this time and space. So I'll pass it over to Lynette, I think.
Well, thank you for this opportunity, and so I think given what everyone has said, this is at the end of the road here. I want to say something. So I want to talk a bit about the we and the there, and I really when I think about that question, are we there yet? And, what was it that made global citizenship a necessary concept? When I try to think about this idea of there, that we're somewhere different, I think that we downplay the extent to which neoliberalism devastated the work of teaching and learning and our institutions. And in some ways, I mentioned earlier that wherever I go, groups like this assemble to talk about global citizenship. And we hear creative things. I love the programs that are emerging in this project. The Bosnia project, that in some ways, so earlier on I had written down that the journey that's implied in that question is that we're seeking a refuge, actually, from the destructiveness of this ideology that pit us against each other, that prescribed austerity approaches in all of our countries, and an ideology that told us that we were only self-interested individuals. And we see that in our curriculums. We see that in the way that higher education is organized now. The idea of the knowledge economy is impossible if we think of how ideas and knowledge works, and how people working with ideas and knowledge, teaching and learning and researching work. What we've had to do to ourselves in order to fit into that ideology has been brutal. And so it's fascinating to me that whenever we gather to talk about global citizenship, very cool things happen. Really innovative ideas. People find, as I said earlier, these cracks to do different kinds of work, to work together in new ways. And so despite, the global capitalists of taking over the idea, we'll just let them go imagine themselves there, while we do the work that needs to be done. And so I think this is a really important time that we are actually in these meetings transforming the spaces where higher education is being done. So maybe the question next time will be, what does global citizenship do? How does it shift those institutional spaces and the governance processes that we have? and it just changes, and that therefore changes those relations. And I think it saves us from that despair of being alone, being told that we are just an individual on your own. And so I think I kind of like global citizenship at the moment.